Imagine a high-security truck, sealed tight, rolling into Germany in April 1917. Inside, not gold or weapons, but 19 Russians deemed too dangerous for pretty much any country in Europe. This story isn't about giant robots or laser beams, but of a historical blunder with consequences that still echo today. So stay tuned, because we're about to dive into a case of short-sightedness that changed the course of history. Hi, my name is Sebastian. You're watching Mistakes That Changed the World. The only place that would even consider letting in those 19 Russians was Switzerland, with its famous policy of neutrality. These people we're talking about weren't your average tourists, they weren't even your average citizens. Why? Here's a hint. Amongst them was a firebrand revolutionary named Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. He managed to escape the clutches of the Russian secret police and found refuge in Switzerland, where he then secretly plotted with his radical Bolshevik party. Stuck in Europe's neutral zone, Lenin was like a revolutionary with a silenced gun. World War I had choked off communication with Russia, leaving him itching to get back in the game. So he did something audacious. He reached out to the German ambassador in Switzerland, the very country that once considered him a top enemy. The German Kaiser, you see, wasn't exactly a fan of revolutionaries, but guess what? Germany was knee-deep in World War I and things weren't looking good. So Lenin had a crazy proposition. He'd spark a revolution in Russia, knocking them out of the war on the Eastern Front. This was music to the ears of the desperate Germans. Here was a chance to weaken their enemy. Even though Lenin's Bolshevik party was tiny compared to Russia's population, anything that caused chaos and distracted the new Russian government was a win for Germany. It's hard to imagine the German high command actually believing Lenin could overthrow the whole Russian government, but they were willing to take a gamble. A chaotic Russia was better than a strong one fighting alongside their enemies. So Germany accepted this proposition and sent Lenin packing back to Russia in what was said to be a sealed train, a secret weapon disguised as a railcar. They even funded his revolutionary activities, but what they didn't expect was just how effective Lenin would be. By November 1917, he had pulled off the unthinkable, a full-blown revolution. Turns out the moderate leader Alexander Kerensky, who ruled the government after the Tsar's abdication, had made a series of blunders, like keeping Russia in the war, skyrocketing food prices, and ignoring the desperate pleas of peasants for land reform. It was all a recipe for disaster. When Lenin and the Bolsheviks finally made their move, the unpopular government barely put up a fight. Even the Women's Battalion of Petrograd, known for their fierce loyalty, couldn't defend the crumbling Menshevik regime. Now, I do have to note that Lenin's revolution was more of an insurrection, riddled with mistakes and amateur moves. If it wasn't for Kerensky's weak grip on the situation, the October Revolution would have most likely failed miserably. Lenin's revolution delivered in the short term. Russia was out of the war just like Germany wanted. But then things got messy. The Germans, feeling cocky after Lenin's success, decided to push their luck. They demanded a huge chunk of territory as payment for their help. They wanted Poland, the Baltic countries, and even Ukraine. Lenin wasn't exactly thrilled with this land grab, and so Russia refused. This was Germany's second big mistake because it shattered any trust between the two countries. And Germany went from backing Lenin to backing his enemies, funding the Polish resistance and the anti-communist White Guard for the next 10 years. So, did Germany's gamble on Lenin pay off? Well, not quite. Sure, Russia left the war, but it happened right as Germany was launching a massive offensive at Verdun, their last-ditch effort to win before the US joined the fight. Unfortunately for Germany, that offensive failed miserably. The French held their ground, and by the time those German troops were finally freed from the Eastern Front, it was too late. Fresh American soldiers were flooding the battlefields, tipping the scales heavily against Germany. Basically, the Germans traded a strong enemy on the Eastern Front for a fresh and powerful one on the Western Front. Not exactly a strategic win. The fallout from this whole Lenin situation was massive. It took years for the Red Army to fully unify Russia under communist control, all the while facing intense hostility from Germany. This created a decades-long grudge match between the two nations. By the time the dust settled, Stalin was in power and the communist agenda was clear: world domination. And yet, it seems crazy that Russia, after getting burned by Germany, would then secretly train the German army. Yes, from 1922 to 1933, these two cooperated to rebuild their armies and develop new weapon systems that were then used in World War II. History is indeed full of strange bedfellows, right? Anyway, this whole ordeal is a perfect example of a short-sighted gamble with massive consequences. Germany thought they were getting a quick win by supporting Lenin, but they ended up with a hostile Russia and a strengthened enemy on the Western Front. Russia, for their part, got a revolution, but at the cost of a long-standing animosity with a powerful neighbor. But of course, there's another reason why this move turned out to be one of the biggest blunders of the 20th century. The Bolsheviks were a tiny, radical fringe group. Without Lenin's leadership and ruthlessness, they probably would have stayed that way, a blip on the historical radar. Instead, Germany gave them the spark they needed to ignite a full-blown revolution. Think about that. If Lenin hadn't been there, a more moderate government might have kept power. Russia might have stayed in the war, but it wouldn't have become the communist superpower that terrified the world for decades. The ripple effects are mind-blowing. No Lenin, possibly no Stalin, millions of lives potentially saved from the horrors of collectivization. But we can go even further. A weakened communist movement in Germany might have meant no rise of Hitler or the Nazis. That's a domino effect that could have rewritten the course of the 20th century. No World War II, no Cold War, and maybe even no Mao Zedong and Fidel Castro. This whole story is a chilling reminder of how seemingly small actions can have massive, unforeseen consequences. So the next time you think a decision is just a blip on the radar, think again. History might be watching. But hey, that's just one theory. What do you guys think? Did Germany make a huge mistake by sending Lenin back to Russia? Let me know in the comments downstairs. Don't forget to subscribe for more wild stories about the twists and turns of history. If you like what you saw, perhaps you might want to visit my Patreon page. I do want to thank my long-standing patrons Dan and Lawrence Neal for being my fans for years now. In the meantime, I do hope to see you next time. Bye.